They say blood is thicker than water, but what they don't tell you is that sometimes blood can run colder than ice. I learned this lesson at 78 years old, locked in a basement freezer by the very child I sacrificed everything to raise. My name is Margaret Thornfield, though everyone calls me Maggie, and this is the story of how my own daughter tried to freeze me out of existence, until she discovered the fortune I'd been hiding for decades. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light streaming through my basement window carries no warmth, just like everything else in this house that my daughter Linda calls home. I sit here on the edge of this narrow cot that serves as my bed, my arthritic fingers wrapped around a cup of lukewarm coffee that's gone bitter from sitting too long. The concrete floor beneath my slippered feet feels like ice, and I pull my worn cardigan tighter around my shoulders. This is my life now, at 78 years old, relegated to the basement of the home where I'm supposed to be cared for and loved. 6 months ago, Linda convinced me to sell my little cottage on Maple Street. She stood in my kitchen, her perfectly manicured hands gesturing at the peeling wallpaper and the faucet that dripped just slightly, painting a picture of danger and decline that made my cozy home sound like a death trap. Her voice carried that tone she'd perfected over the years, the one that made concern sound like criticism. "Mom, you can't keep living like this," she said, her eyes scanning my kitchen with the kind of judgment that made me feel small. "What if you fall? What if something happens? Rick and I have been talking, and we think it's time you came to live with us. We have that nice basement room, and you'd be so much safer." Safer. The word echoes in my mind now as I listen to the footsteps above me, the sound of my daughter and her husband Rick starting their day in the warmth and comfort of the upper floors, while I exist in this concrete tomb they've created for me. The basement room they promised would be comfortable has become my prison, complete with a tiny window that barely lets in light and a space heater that Rick controls from upstairs. I remember the day I moved in, how Linda smiled that bright smile of hers as she showed me down the narrow wooden stairs. The room smelled of mildew and old paint, but she acted like she was giving me a tour of a luxury suite. The single bed with its thin mattress was pushed against one wall. A small dresser with a broken drawer handle stood in the corner, and a folding chair that wobbled when I sat in it completed the furnishings. "Isn't this perfect, Mom?" Linda had said, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "You'll have your privacy down here, and we'll all be one big happy family." One big happy family. The phrase tastes bitter in my mouth now, like medicine that's supposed to heal but only makes you sicker. In the 6 months since I've been here, I've learned that family dinners don't include me, unless Linda needs someone to serve the food or clean the dishes. I've discovered that my opinion doesn't matter when it comes to the television programs we watch, the temperature of the house, or even what I eat for breakfast. The woman who raised Linda to be strong and independent, who worked 2 jobs to put her through college, who sacrificed my own dreams so she could have hers, has become invisible in her own daughter's home. I exist here like a piece of furniture that serves a purpose when needed and is ignored when it doesn't. My daily routine has become as predictable as the sunrise I can barely see through my tiny window. I wake before dawn, not because I want to, but because the basement is so cold that sleep becomes impossible once the house settles into its nighttime quiet. I make my way upstairs to the kitchen, careful not to make noise that might wake Linda and Rick, and I prepare their coffee and set out their breakfast dishes like some kind of elderly house servant. Linda appears around 7:30, already dressed for her job at the insurance company, her blonde hair perfectly styled and her makeup applied with the precision of someone who's never had to rush through a morning routine. She barely acknowledges my presence as she pours her coffee and checks her phone, scrolling through messages that are apparently more important than saying good morning to her mother. "Morning, Mom," she might say if I'm lucky, but her eyes never leave the screen. Sometimes she'll make a comment about something I've done wrong, like leaving water spots on the counter or not arranging her pills in the exact order she prefers. These moments of acknowledgement feel like gifts, even when they're wrapped in criticism, because at least they prove I still exist in her world. Rick is worse. He looks at me like I'm an inconvenience, something that disrupts the perfect life. He and Linda have built together. He's a large man with soft hands and a harder heart, the kind of person who measures people's worth by what they can do for him. In his mind, I'm a burden that his wife insisted on taking in, and he makes sure I know it through his silence and his sighs whenever I'm in his presence. The loneliness is the hardest part. I spend my days in that basement room, listening to the sounds of life happening above me. I hear Linda and Rick laughing at their television shows, talking about their plans for the weekend, discussing renovations they want to make to the house. They live their lives in full color while I exist, in shades of gray, forgotten and fading. I think about my late husband William during these long hours. He died when Linda was only 12, leaving me to raise her alone while working as a seamstress at Morrison's Alterations and cleaning offices at night to make ends meet. I remember how he used to tell me that Linda would take care of me when I got older, that all the love and sacrifice I poured into raising her would come back to me when I needed it most. "That little girl adores you, Maggie," he would say when Linda would climb into our bed after a nightmare, snuggling between us like she was trying to absorb our love through her skin. "She's going to make sure you're never alone." William was wrong, but I can't blame him for believing in the goodness he saw in our daughter. Linda was a sweet child, full of curiosity and affection. She would bring me dandelions she picked from the yard and called them flowers, would sit by my sewing machine for hours just to be near me while I worked. I thought that love would grow, with her, that the foundation of care and devotion I built would support us both through whatever challenges life brought. Instead, I watch my daughter become someone I barely recognize. Success changed her, or maybe it just revealed parts of her character that were always there, hidden beneath the surface of childhood innocence. Her job at the insurance company pays well, and combined with Rick's salary as a middle manager at a manufacturing plant, they live comfortably in their suburban home with its manicured lawn and two-car garage. But comfort hasn't made Linda more generous or kind. If anything, it's made her more protective of what she has, more suspicious of anyone who might want to take it away. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She looks at me now like I'm a threat to her security, a drain on her resources that she tolerates out of duty rather than love. The irony isn't lost on me. The daughter I raised to be independent and self-sufficient now sees my dependence as a weakness, my aging as an inconvenience. She's forgotten that independence was a gift I gave her by working myself to exhaustion, by going without so she could have what she needed. I remember the day she graduated from college, how proud I felt standing in that crowd of parents, watching her walk across the stage in her cap and gown. I had worked extra hours for months to help pay for her education, my fingers cramped from endless hours of sewing, my back aching from scrubbing floors until they gleamed. But seeing her achievement made every sacrifice worth it. "I couldn't have done this without you, Mom," she had said that day, hugging me tight while tears of joy streamed down both our faces. "I promise I'll make you proud." She did make me proud for a while. She got a good job, married Rick, bought this nice house in a safe neighborhood. But somewhere along the way, her gratitude turned into resentment, her love into obligation. The mother who had been her biggest supporter became a reminder of where she came from, of the struggles she wanted to forget. Now I'm the family secret, hidden away in the basement like something shameful. When Linda's friends come over, I'm expected to stay downstairs, out of sight and out of mind. When Rick's family visits, I'm introduced briefly and then dismissed, sent back to my room like a child who's misbehaved at a dinner party. The isolation eats at me more than the cold or the uncomfortable bed, or the meals that consist of whatever, leftovers Linda remembers to bring me. I'm disappearing bit by bit, becoming a ghost in the house where I'm supposed to be finding comfort in my final years. But I'm not just any ghost. I'm a ghost with secrets, with resources that Linda can't imagine, and plans that I'm still formulating in the quiet hours when the house sleeps above me. My daughter thinks she knows everything about me, thinks she's taken control of my life and my future. She's about to learn how wrong she is. The woman who raised her to be strong learned a few things about strength herself over the years. The Thai seamstress who spent decades working with her hands never forgot how to weave plans as carefully as she once wove fabric. And the mother who sacrificed everything for her child's happiness is about to discover what happens when that sacrifice isn't returned with love. I finish my bitter coffee and stand up from the cot, my joints protesting the movement like they do every morning. Upstairs, I can hear Linda and Rick getting ready for their day, the sounds of running water and closing doors that signal they'll soon be gone, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my growing determination. Today feels different somehow, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. I can sense that something is building, that the careful balance Linda has created in this house is about to shift. She's pushed me further and further into the shadows, treating me with increasing cruelty and indifference. But she's made one crucial mistake. She's forgotten that the woman she's trying to erase once had the strength to raise a child alone, to work multiple jobs while maintaining a home, to save money even when there was barely enough to survive. She's forgotten that the mother she dismisses as weak and useless once moved mountains to give her daughter a better life. Linda is about to remember. And when she does, the foundation of everything she thinks she knows about our family, about me, and about her own future is going to crack wide open. I make my way to the small window and look out at the morning sky. Gray clouds gathering on the horizon like storm clouds building toward something inevitable. The woman Linda sees as a burden is about to become something else entirely. The question isn't whether I'm strong enough to change my situation. The question is whether Linda is strong enough to handle the truth when it finally comes to light. Because the mother she's been trying to freeze out has been keeping warm with secrets that are about to melt her daughter's world. The bowl slipped from my trembling hands like it had a mind of its own, the ceramic hitting the kitchen floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire house. Chicken noodle soup splattered across Linda's pristine white tiles, creating a pattern that looked almost artistic in its chaos. For a moment, I stood frozen, staring down at the mess I'd made, my arthritic fingers still curved as if they were holding something that was no longer there. I should have seen it coming. My hands had been getting weaker lately, the joints swollen and painful in the morning dampness that seemed to seep through every corner of this house. But Linda had been talking, her voice sharp with irritation as she complained about her coworkers' incompetence, and I'd been trying to listen while carrying my lunch from the microwave to the small table in the corner where I was allowed to eat. The silence that followed the crash felt heavier than the bowl itself. I could hear Linda's sharp intake of breath behind me, could feel the temperature in the room drop several degrees as her anger filled the space between us. When I finally worked up the courage to turn around, her face had transformed into something I barely recognized, twisted with a fury that seemed completely out of proportion to a simple accident. "Are you kidding me right now?" Her voice started low, dangerous, like the rumble before a thunderstorm. "Do you have any idea how much those tiles cost? Do you know how long it took me to clean this kitchen this morning?" I opened my mouth, to apologize, to explain that it was an accident, that my hands weren't as steady as they used to be, but Linda wasn't interested in explanations. She was already grabbing paper towels, her movements sharp and aggressive as she knelt down to clean up the soup, muttering under her breath about clumsiness and carelessness, and how some people just couldn't be trusted with simple tasks. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," I managed to say, the endearment feeling strange and hollow in the charged atmosphere of the kitchen. "Let me help you clean it up." "Don't." The word came out like a slap, stopping me mid-reach toward the paper towel. Dispenser. Just don't. You've done enough damage for one day. I watched her clean up my mess, this daughter I'd raised to be kind and compassionate, and wondered when she'd become so cold. The Linda I remembered would have laughed at a spilled bowl, would have told me not to worry about it while we cleaned it up together. This woman scrubbing my soup off her floor looked at me like I was a stranger who'd wandered into her house, uninvited. Rick appeared in the doorway just as Linda was throwing the last of the soiled paper towels into the trash. He took in the scene with those calculating eyes of his, the way he always did when something happened that might affect his perfectly ordered world. His gaze moved from Linda's flushed face to my guilty expression, and I could see him filing the information away for future use. "What happened here?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew and wasn't pleased about it. "Mom decided to redecorate the kitchen floor with her lunch," Linda said, her voice dripping with sarcasm that cut deeper than any direct insult could have. "I guess holding a bowl is too complicated now." The shame that washed over me felt like drowning. These were the people who were supposed to love me, supposed to care for me in my declining years, and they were treating me like a misbehaving child who couldn't be trusted with basic tasks. I wanted to defend myself, to point out that accidents happen to everyone, that my arthritis made simple tasks more difficult than they used to be. But the words died in my throat under their combined disapproval. "Maybe it's time we had a conversation about Mom's capabilities," Rick said, and something in his tone made my blood run cold. If she can't handle eating without making a mess, maybe she needs more supervision. More supervision. The phrase hung in the air like a threat, and I felt something shift in the dynamic of our strange household. Up until now, Linda and Rick had been content to ignore me most of the time, to let me exist in my basement room like a piece of furniture they'd forgotten to throw away. But this accident had apparently crossed some invisible line, had given them an excuse to tighten their control even further. "You're right," Linda said, and the agreement in her voice terrified me more than her anger had. "We can't have her making messes all over the house. What if she breaks something valuable next time? What if she hurts herself?" They were talking about me like I wasn't standing right there, planning my future without consulting me, and I felt the last of my dignity slipping away like the soup I'd spilled on their precious floor. These weren't the actions of people who loved me. These were the calculations of people who saw me as a problem to be managed, a burden to be controlled. "I think," Rick said slowly, his voice taking on the tone he used when he thought he was being particularly clever, "that Mom needs to learn to be more careful. Maybe if there were consequences for her carelessness, she'd pay better attention to what she's doing." The way he said consequences made my skin crawl. I'd heard that tone before, from supervisors who enjoyed wielding their small amount of power over others, from landlords who took pleasure in finding fault with their tenants. It was the voice of someone who had decided that another person's dignity was less important than their own convenience. Linda nodded slowly, and I could see her mind working, could see her embracing Rick's suggestion with an enthusiasm that broke something inside me. The daughter I'd raised to stand up for others was about to become someone who punished the weak for being weak, who saw cruelty as a reasonable response to human frailty. "What did you have in mind?" she asked, and her eagerness to hurt me was more painful than any physical blow could have been. Rick smiled, and it was the kind of smile that never reached the eyes, the kind that promised pain disguised as justice. "Well, if Mom can't be trusted to eat her meals without making a mess upstairs, maybe she needs to take all her meals in her room. And if she's having trouble with her coordination, maybe she needs to spend some time thinking about being more careful." I knew I should speak up, should defend myself against whatever they were planning, but the words wouldn't come. The woman who had once stood up to landlords and bosses and anyone who tried to take advantage of her daughter was somehow paralyzed in the face of that same daughter's cruelty. Love, I was learning, could be a weakness as much as a strength. "That's a good start," Linda said thoughtfully. But I think she needs something more dramatic, something that will really make an impression. The conversation continued around me as if I were invisible, as if my thoughts and feelings about their plans were completely irrelevant. They discussed different ways to punish me for my accident with the casual ease of people planning a weekend, outing, weighing options, and considering alternatives with no regard for my humanity. Finally, Rick's face lit up with inspiration. "You know what might work? The storage room in the basement. It's cold down there, uncomfortable. A few hours. Thinking about being more careful might do her some good." The storage room. I knew the space he meant. A windowless concrete box next to the water heater where Linda kept her Christmas decorations and old furniture she couldn't decide whether to keep or donate. It was cramped and damp and colder than the rest of the basement, the kind of place that felt like a tomb even when you weren't trapped inside it. "Perfect," Linda said, and the satisfaction in her voice made me sick. A timeout, just like when she was a child, except now she's the child who needs to learn better behavior. The comparison stung worse than the punishment itself. I had never locked Linda in a cold room when she misbehaved as a child. I had never treated her mistakes as reasons for cruelty. Even when she tested my patience to its limits, even when I was exhausted from work and worry, I had always tried to discipline her with love, to teach her lessons that would help her become a better person. Clearly, those lessons hadn't taken root the way I'd hoped they would. "I think tonight would be good timing," Rick continued, warming to his theme. "After dinner, when she's tired and more likely to really think about what she's done, we'll let her out in the morning, and I bet she'll be a lot more careful with our dishes after that." Our dishes. Everything in this house was theirs, from the furniture I wasn't allowed to sit on to the food I was permitted to eat. I had become a guest who had overstayed her welcome, a charity case who needed to be grateful for whatever scraps of kindness they chose to throw my way. The afternoon passed in a haze of dread and disbelief. I retreated to my basement room and sat on the edge of my narrow bed, trying to process what I'd heard, trying to convince myself that Linda wouldn't really go through with such a cruel punishment for something as innocent as a dropped bowl. But deep down, I knew she would. The daughter I'd raised had become someone capable of casual cruelty, someone who could rationalize causing pain to her own mother. Dinner was a tense affair. Linda had prepared spaghetti with meat sauce, one of my favorite meals from when she was growing up, and for a moment I allowed myself to hope that her choice of menu meant she was having second thoughts about her punishment. But the way she watched me eat, the way her eyes tracked every movement of my fork from plate to mouth, told me that she was simply looking for another excuse to criticize my behavior. I ate with exaggerated care, cutting my spaghetti into small pieces, chewing slowly and deliberately, trying to avoid any action that might be construed as careless or messy. But my hands were shaking from nervousness, and I could feel sauce occasionally dripping from my fork, despite my best efforts to control it. "You're making a mess again," Linda observed after I'd been eating for only a few minutes. "Look at your placemat. Look at the table around your plate." I looked down and saw a few small drops of sauce that had escaped my notice, barely visible spots that wouldn't have warranted a comment in any normal household. But this wasn't a normal household, and Linda wasn't a normal daughter. She was a predator who had found her prey weak and vulnerable, and she was enjoying the hunt. "I'm trying to be careful," I said quietly, dabbing at the spots with my napkin, hoping to diffuse the situation before it escalated. "Trying isn't good enough," Rick interjected, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had appointed himself judge and jury of my behavior. "Results are what matter, and the results show that you can't eat a meal without making a mess." They had made up their minds before I'd taken a single bite, I realized. This dinner wasn't a chance for me to prove I could be more careful. It was a formality, a way to justify the punishment they'd already decided to inflict. My behavior was irrelevant. They were going to find fault no matter what I did. After dinner, as I was clearing my plate from the table with trembling hands, Linda stood up and straightened her shoulders like someone preparing for an unpleasant but necessary task. Mom, Rick and I have been talking about your accident today, and we've decided that you need some time to think about being more careful with our things. Her use of the word "our" felt deliberate, a reminder that nothing in this house belonged to me, that I was dependent on their generosity for everything from the food I ate to the roof over my head. It was a power play designed to make me feel small and grateful, and I hated how well it worked. "Linda, please," I started to say, but she held up her hand to stop me. "This isn't a discussion, Mom. This is us taking responsibility for your well-being and helping you learn better habits. You're going to spend the night in the storage room, thinking about how to be more careful, and in the morning, we'll talk about whether you've learned your lesson." The night in the storage room. The punishment Rick had suggested that afternoon was really going to happen, and Linda was presenting it like it was for my own good, like causing me distress and discomfort was an act of love rather than cruelty. "Sweetheart, I'm 78 years old," I said, trying to appeal to whatever remained of her compassion. "I have arthritis. My hands shake sometimes. Dropping that bowl was an accident, not deliberate carelessness." But Linda's expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened further, as if my explanation had somehow proven her point rather than refuting it. "That's exactly why you need to be more careful, Mom. If your hands shake, then you need to pay more attention to what you're doing. You need to move slower, think more before you act." She was turning my physical limitations into character flaws, my aging into evidence of carelessness. The daughter I'd raised to be understanding and empathetic was using my vulnerabilities against me, weaponizing my need for patience and accommodation into reasons for punishment. Rick stood up and walked to the basement door, holding it open like a jailer preparing to escort a prisoner to her cell. "Come on, Margaret. The sooner you get started thinking about your behavior, the sooner this will be over." The way he said my name, formal and cold, reminded me that I had no real relationship with this man who controlled so much of my daily life. I wasn't his mother-in-law in any meaningful sense. I was just an obstacle to his comfort, a problem that he and Linda had to manage as efficiently as possible. I followed him down the stairs to the basement, my legs shaking with each step, my heart pounding with a fear I hadn't felt since I was a child. The storage room door stood open, revealing a space even smaller and more depressing than I'd remembered. Boxes of Christmas decorations were stacked against one wall. An old desk chair with a broken wheel sat in one corner, and the concrete floor was bare and cold. "There's a blanket on that chair," Linda said from behind me, her voice carrying a false note of consideration that made the gesture seem even crueler. "You should be comfortable enough for one night." Comfortable. She was going to lock me in a windowless concrete room overnight and call it comfortable because she'd provided a single thin blanket. The woman who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who had clung to me when she was scared or hurt, was about to trap me in a space that would have terrified her as a child. "Please don't do this," I whispered. One last attempt to reach whatever remained of the daughter I'd loved and sacrificed for. "Please, Linda. I'll be more careful. I promise I'll be more careful." But she was already closing the door, the sound of the latch clicking into place like a gunshot in the small space. I heard her footsteps moving away, heard Rick's voice saying something about teaching old dogs new tricks, heard their laughter fading as they went back upstairs to their warm, comfortable living room, and then there was silence. Complete, absolute silence broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the faint hum of the water heater in the next room. I was alone in the dark, trapped like an animal, abandoned by the only family I had left in the world. I groped for the blanket Linda had mentioned and wrapped it around my shoulders, but it provided little warmth against the cold that seemed to seep through the concrete walls and floor. The darkness was complete, so thick I couldn't see my own hands in front of my face, and I had to feel my way to the corner where I could sit with my back against the wall. The hours stretched endlessly, I dozed fitfully, waking frequently from dreams where I was drowning or suffocating, where walls were closing in around me and I couldn't find a way out. My joints ached from the cold and the hard floor, and I found myself shifting position constantly, trying to find some arrangement of my body that didn't cause pain. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the emotional devastation of being abandoned by my own child. Linda had looked me in the eye and decided that my dignity, my comfort, my basic human need for warmth and safety were less important than teaching me a lesson about dropped bowls. She had chosen cruelty over compassion, punishment over understanding. As the night wore on, something began to change inside me. The fear and hurt started to crystallize into something harder, more focused. The woman who had survived poverty and widowhood, who had worked multiple jobs to give her daughter a better life, was still inside me somewhere beneath the layer of confusion and heartbreak. Linda thought she was breaking me, teaching me to be grateful for whatever scraps of kindness she chose to offer. But she was actually doing something else entirely. She was reminding me of who I used to be before I became dependent on her approval, before I let her convince me that I was helpless and useless. The mother who had raised Linda to be strong was stronger than either of them realized. And the woman they were trying to control had resources they couldn't imagine, plans they knew nothing about, and a will that 60 years of life's challenges had forged into something unbreakable. By the time morning light began to filter under the storage room door, I had made several important decisions. The first was that I would never again allow anyone to treat me with such casual cruelty. The second was that Linda was about to discover exactly what kind of woman she had chosen to cross. The third decision was the most important of all. It was time to stop being the victim in my own story and start being the author instead. Linda thought she knew everything about me, thought she held all the cards in our relationship. She was about to learn how wrong she was. The morning after my imprisonment, Linda unlocked the storage room door with the casual indifference of someone checking on laundry rather than releasing her 78-year-old mother from a night of torment. I had spent hours preparing for this moment, rehearsing in my mind how I would respond, what mask I would wear to hide the transformation that had occurred in those dark hours. "Good morning, Mom," she said brightly, as if we were beginning any ordinary day rather than the aftermath of deliberate cruelty. "I hope you had time to think about being more careful with our things." I looked up at her from where I sat in the corner, my body stiff from the cold concrete floor, my joints screaming in protest as I struggled to stand. But my mind was clearer than it had been in months, sharpened by anger and focused by purpose, in a way that felt almost intoxicating after so many weeks of confusion and despair. "Yes, dear," I said quietly, letting just enough tremor into my voice to suggest the broken old woman she expected to see. "I've had plenty of time to think." What I didn't tell her was what I'd been thinking about. While she and Rick slept peacefully in their warm bed upstairs, I had been remembering things I'd forgotten, calculating numbers I hadn't considered in years, and making plans that would have terrified them both if they'd had any inkling of what was forming in my mind. Linda helped me to my feet with theatrical concern, her hands gentle on my arms as she guided me out of the storage room and back to my basement quarters. To anyone observing, she would have looked like a caring daughter tending to her elderly mother. But I could see the satisfaction in her eyes, the way she examined my face for signs of submission and defeat. "Are you feeling all right?" she asked, her voice carrying just enough worry to maintain her facade of concern. "You look a little pale." "I'm fine, sweetheart," I assured her, playing my role as the chastened mother who had learned her lesson. "Just tired. It was hard to sleep on that floor." "Well, hopefully you won't have to do it again," she said with false brightness. "As long as you're more careful, we won't have any more problems." The threat was clear beneath her cheerful tone. Behave or face punishment. Submit or suffer consequences. She thought she had established the rules of our new relationship, that she had successfully trained me to fear her displeasure more than I valued my own dignity. But Linda had made a crucial error in her calculations. She had assumed that breaking my spirit would make me more compliant, more grateful for whatever scraps of kindness she chose to offer. Instead, she had awakened something in me that had been dormant for too long, something that remembered what it felt like to be strong and independent and completely in control of my own destiny. I spent the rest of that morning moving carefully through the house, playing the part of the subdued elder who had learned her place. I prepared breakfast for Linda and Rick without comment, cleaned the kitchen with extra attention to detail, and spoke only when spoken to. But beneath this performance of compliance, my mind was racing through possibilities and plans that would have shocked them with their audacity. After Linda and Rick left for work, I waited exactly 30 minutes before beginning my real work for the day. The first step was to access the boxes I had stored in Linda's attic when I moved into her house, the ones she had dismissed as old junk and forgotten about completely. Those boxes contained the carefully preserved records of a life she knew nothing about, documents that told a very different story than the one she believed about her helpless, impoverished mother. The attic ladder creaked under my weight as I climbed up, my arthritic hands gripping the rungs with determination born of desperation and anger. The space above was dusty and cramped, filled with Linda's cast-offs and forgotten purchases, but I navigated through the clutter like I was following a map burned into my memory. My boxes were exactly where I had left them, pushed into a corner and covered with a tarp that Rick had thrown over them without bothering to ask what they contained. He had assumed, like Linda, that anything belonging to me must be worthless. By definition, their ignorance was about to become their downfall. The first box contained my financial records, meticulously organized in manila folders that I had labeled and maintained for decades. Bank statements, investment records, property, deeds, insurance policies, and tax returns going back 30 years. The documentation of a financial life that Linda had never known existed, built through sacrifice and careful planning that she had never bothered to ask about. My hands shook as I opened the most recent bank statement. Not from arthritis this time, but from excitement and something that felt dangerously close to revenge. The numbers on the page were exactly what I remembered, exactly what I had been too afraid to believe until I saw them again in black and white. Margaret Rose Thornfield, the woman Linda had relegated to a basement room and treated like a burden, was worth more than $3 million. The money had come from many sources over the years. The life insurance policy William had insisted on buying when Linda was born, which had paid out handsomely when he died. The small house I had owned before Linda convinced me to sell it, which had appreciated far more than I had expected in the decades since I had bought it. The careful investments I had made with every spare dollar I could find, advised by a financial planner I had met through the women's group at my church. But most significantly, there was the inheritance from my Uncle Theodore, my father's brother who had died childless 15 years ago and left his considerable estate to his only living relatives. Theodore had been a successful businessman who had never married, never had children, and had spent his later years accumulating wealth that he couldn't take with him. His lawyer had tracked me down through genealogy records and informed me that I was receiving nearly $2 million from a man I had barely known, but who had remembered family when it mattered most. Linda knew nothing about Uncle Theodore or his generosity. She had been so busy with her own life, so focused on her career and her marriage, that she had barely noticed when I had briefly moved away to settle his estate. I had told her I was visiting an old friend, and she had been so uninterested in my activities that she hadn't asked for details. The money had sat in my accounts for years, earning interest and growing through careful investments, while I lived, modestly and quietly. I had always planned to use it to ensure Linda's future, to help her buy a bigger house or send her children to college when they came along. I had fantasized about surprising her with a generous gift that would show her how much I loved her, how much I wanted her to be happy and secure. But Linda had never had children, had shown no interest in anything I might offer her, and had made it clear that she saw me as a burden rather than a blessing. The money that was meant to be her inheritance had become my secret weapon, my insurance, policy against the cruelty she seemed determined to inflict. I photographed the bank statements with the small digital camera I had hidden in my personal belongings, then carefully returned the documents to their proper folders. The second box contained legal documents, including the will I had drafted, but never told Linda about, and the power of attorney papers she had repeatedly asked me to sign, but that I had managed to avoid completing. The third box was the most important of all. It contained the deed to a property that Linda didn't know I owned, a small but comfortable house in a retirement community about an hour away from her suburban neighborhood. I had bought it 2 years ago as an investment, but also as a backup plan for exactly the kind of situation I now found myself in. The Golden Acres senior living community was nothing like the grim nursing homes that Linda threatened me with whenever she wanted to emphasize my dependence on her kindness. It was a beautifully maintained complex of individual homes and garden apartments, populated by active seniors who had chosen to live there for the amenities and social opportunities it offered. The house I owned there was small but perfectly appointed, with a modern kitchen, comfortable furniture, and a little garden where I could grow flowers if I wanted to. I had visited the property several times over the past 2 years, always when Linda thought I was at doctor's appointments or running errands. I had even furnished it modestly, preparing it as a retreat I might someday need. I had never imagined that someday would come so soon, or that Linda's cruelty would make the decision to leave feel like liberation rather than defeat. The documents in that third box also included the business cards and contact information for the professionals I would need to execute my plan. Eleanor Richardson, the estate planning attorney who had helped me structure my investments and draft my will. James Morrison, the financial advisor who had helped me grow Uncle Theodore's inheritance into something even more substantial. Dr. Patricia Henley, the geriatrician who had been my primary care physician for the past 5 years and who could attest to my mental competency and physical independence. These were the people who knew the real Margaret Thornfield, the woman who had successfully managed her own affairs for decades without Linda's help or oversight. They were my allies in a battle that Linda didn't even know was being fought, professionals, who would help me reclaim my independence and dignity. I spent the afternoon making careful notes and reviewing my options, planning my escape from Linda's house with the same attention to detail I had once brought to managing a household budget or organizing a church fundraiser. The woman who had raised a daughter while working multiple jobs had not forgotten how to multitask, how to solve complex problems with limited resources and careful planning. The most delicate part of my plan would be timing. I needed to coordinate several moving pieces without arousing Linda's suspicion, and I needed to do it all while maintaining the facade of the broken-down old woman she expected me to be. Any sign that I was planning something would bring increased scrutiny and possibly more severe restrictions on my freedom. But I also needed to move quickly, before Linda and Rick decided that their storage room punishment wasn't sufficient to keep me in line. I could see the escalation building in their treatment of me, could feel them testing the boundaries of what they could get away with. The woman who had survived a night locked in a concrete room might not survive whatever they decided to try next. When Linda came home from work that evening, I was sitting in my basement room with a book in my lap, the picture of elderly compliance. She checked on me with the casual attention of someone making sure a pet hadn't made a mess, and I responded with the grateful subservience she expected from someone who had been properly disciplined. "How was your day, Mom?" she asked, not because she cared about my answer, but because the question maintained her fiction that she was a caring daughter rather than a jailer. "Quiet, dear," I replied truthfully. "I spent most of it resting and thinking about what you said this morning." "Good," she said with satisfaction. "I'm glad you're taking this seriously. Rick and I just want you to be safe and comfortable here, but that means you need to be more careful about respecting our home." The way she said our home was deliberate, another reminder that I was a guest who could be asked to leave if I didn't follow their rules. But Linda had no idea that being asked to leave would actually be the best possible outcome for me at this point. She thought homelessness was my greatest fear when it was actually my greatest hope. "I understand, sweetheart," I said meekly. "I'll try harder to be the kind of houseguest you want me to be." The word houseguest rather than mother or family member hung in the air between us, and I saw Linda process the subtle shift in my language. For just a moment she looked uncertain, as if she was realizing that her treatment of me was changing our relationship in ways she hadn't fully considered. But the moment passed quickly, and she was back to her brisk, managing tone. "Well, as long as we understand each other. Dinner will be ready in an hour." After she left, I allowed myself a small smile. Linda thought she was training me to be grateful and compliant, but she was actually giving me the perfect cover for my preparations. Every day she treated me like a burden rather than her mother was another day I felt more justified in the plans I was making. I had raised Linda to be independent and strong, but I had forgotten to remain independent and strong myself. I had allowed her to convince me that aging meant accepting whatever treatment others chose to give me, that being older meant being powerless. But the night in the storage room had reminded me that I still had choices, still had resources, still had fight left in me. Linda was about to discover that the mother she had dismissed as weak and helpless was actually a formidable opponent. The woman who had survived widowhood and poverty, who had built a successful life from nothing, who had accumulated wealth and planned for the future while appearing to struggle with day-to-day survival, was not going to go quietly into the role of grateful dependent. The daughter who thought she knew everything about me was about to learn that she knew nothing at all, and the lesson was going to cost her far more than she could imagine. Over the next few days, I established a routine that allowed me to make the phone calls and arrangements I needed while Linda and Rick were at work. I contacted Eleanor Richardson first, explaining my situation in careful terms that avoided accusations, while making my circumstances clear. "Margaret, I'm so sorry to hear you're having difficulties," Eleanor said when I described my living situation. "But I want you to know that you have options. You're not dependent on anyone's charity, and you certainly don't have to accept treatment that makes you uncomfortable." "I've been thinking about the house at Golden Acres," I told her. "The one I bought as an investment. I'm wondering if it might be time to make it my primary residence." "That's absolutely possible," Eleanor assured me. "In fact, it might be the perfect solution. You'd have your independence, your privacy, and access to all the community amenities. Plus, you'd be surrounded by people who chose to be there, not people who see you as an obligation." The word obligation hit home because it perfectly described how Linda saw our relationship. I wasn't her beloved mother who deserved care and respect. I was a duty she had inherited, a responsibility she fulfilled with as little grace as possible. "I'd like to start making arrangements," I said, "but I need to do this carefully. My daughter doesn't know about my financial situation, and I think it's better if it stays that way for now." Eleanor understood immediately. She had worked with enough elderly clients to recognize the signs of family financial abuse, the ways that adult children sometimes tried to control their parents through manufactured dependence. She assured me that everything could be arranged discreetly, that Linda would know nothing about my plans until I was ready to reveal them. My next call was to Dr. Henley, who was delighted to hear from me and completely supportive of my plan to move to Golden Acres. She had been recommending senior communities to her patients for years, and she thought I would thrive in that environment. "Margaret, you're one of my most independent patients," she told me. "You're physically capable of living alone, mentally sharp as a tack, and financially secure. There's no medical reason why you should be dependent on anyone else for your care." "Could you document that?" I asked. "I mean, if questions were ever asked about my capacity to make decisions for myself?" "Absolutely," she said firmly. "In fact, I think I should schedule you for a comprehensive evaluation just to make sure we have current documentation of your cognitive and physical status. Would next week work for you?" By the end of that week, I had assembled a team of professionals who could help me execute my plan and a stack of documentation that proved my competency and independence. I had confirmed that my house at Golden Acres was ready for occupancy, arranged for utilities and services to be connected, and even contacted a moving company that specialized in helping seniors relocate. The only thing left was to choose my moment for revelation. Linda had given me the perfect opportunity with her cruelty, but I wanted to make sure the lesson she learned was complete and unforgettable. I wanted her to understand not just that she had misjudged my capabilities, but that her treatment of me had consequences that would reshape both of our futures. The woman she had tried to break was about to show her what real strength looked like. And the mother she had taken for granted was about to teach her a lesson about the true cost of love and the price of cruelty that she would remember for the rest of her life. The manila envelope felt heavy in my hands as I sat at the small table in my basement room, its contents representing the culmination of weeks of careful planning and secret phone calls. Inside were bank statements, property deeds, investment portfolios, and legal documents that would shatter Linda's understanding of everything she thought she knew about me. But more importantly, they represented my ticket to freedom and dignity. My proof that the woman she had been treating like a helpless dependent was anything but helpless. I had been waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth, and Linda had just handed it to me on a silver platter. This morning, she had cornered me in the kitchen while I was preparing my breakfast. Her face flushed with the kind of righteous anger that comes from someone who believes they hold all the power in a relationship. "Mom, we need to talk," she had announced, her voice carrying the tone she might use with a misbehaving teenager. "Rick and I have been discussing your situation, and we think it's time for some changes around here." I had continued buttering my toast with steady hands, though my heart was racing with anticipation. After weeks of playing the role of the submissive elder, I was finally going to drop my mask and show Linda exactly who she had been dealing with. "What kind of changes, dear?" I had asked innocently, though I suspected I knew exactly what was coming. Linda and Rick had been dropping hints for days about my increasing needs and their growing concerns about my ability to care for myself. "We think you need more supervision," Linda had said, settling into the chair across from me with the air of someone delivering difficult but necessary news. "Your accident with the soup bowl showed us that you're not as steady as you used to be, and we can't risk you getting hurt or damaging our property." Our property. Every time she used that phrase, it was like a knife twisting in my chest, a reminder that I had no claim to anything in this house, no rights or security beyond what they chose to grant me. But what Linda didn't realize was that I had property of my own, resources that dwarfed anything she and Rick had managed to accumulate in their comfortable suburban life. "What did you have in mind?" I had asked, maintaining my facade of anxious compliance while my mind raced ahead to the moment of revelation I had been planning for weeks. Linda had pulled out a folder of her own, thick with brochures and paperwork that she spread across the table with the efficiency of someone who had been planning this conversation for some time. The glossy covers showed smiling elderly people engaged in various activities, but the facilities they advertised were clearly institutional care rather than independent living. "We've been researching some excellent facilities that specialize in seniors who need a little extra help," she had explained, her voice bright with false enthusiasm. "Look at this one, Sunset Manor. They have 24-hour nursing care, structured meal times, and supervised activities. You'd never have to worry about taking care of yourself again." The way she said it made dependency sound like a gift, rather than a prison sentence, but I could see through her careful presentation to the reality beneath. Sunset Manor wasn't a place where people went to live comfortably in their later years. It was a place where families sent elderly relatives they no longer wanted to deal with, a way to outsource the inconvenience of caring for aging parents to paid professionals. "It looks lovely," I had said diplomatically, though the photographs showed exactly the kind of sterile environment I had been dreading since the first time Linda suggested I couldn't live independently. "But wouldn't that be terribly expensive?" Linda had waved away my concern with the casual gesture of someone who had already solved that problem. Don't worry about the money, Mom. We've looked into it, and your Social Security check plus the money from selling your old house should cover most of the basic expenses. Rick and I can help with the rest. Help with the rest? She was talking about spending my money to warehouse me in an institution while presenting it as their generous assistance. The daughter I had raised to be honest and ethical was planning to profit from my exile by claiming credit for expenses I would actually be paying myself. But what truly staggered me was her assumption that I had no resources beyond my modest Social Security check and whatever remained from the sale of my cottage. She had apparently never wondered how I had managed to raise her as a single mother while working low-paying jobs, never questioned how I had afforded to help her through college, never asked about the inheritance I had received or the investments I had made over the years. Linda saw me as she wanted to see me, as a simple woman with a simple life who had never planned beyond her immediate needs. She had no idea that the mother she was trying to dispose of had been preparing for her own future with the same careful attention she had once devoted to preparing for Linda's. When would this happen? I had asked, though I was already mentally reviewing my own plans for departure, my own arrangements that would make her institutional solution completely unnecessary. Well, that's the thing, Linda had said, and something in her tone warned me that the conversation was about to take an even more unpleasant turn. There's a waiting list at the good facilities, and it could be several months before a spot opens up. But in the meantime, we need to make some immediate changes to keep you safe. She had pulled out another set of papers, these bearing the letterhead of a legal firm I didn't recognize. The documents were dense with legal language, but the key phrases jumped out at me like warning signs: power of attorney, medical decisions, financial oversight, guardianship. We've talked to a lawyer about what's best for you, Linda had continued, her voice taking on the soothing tone of someone explaining a complex procedure to a child. These papers would give Rick and me the legal authority to help you manage your affairs. That way, if you have another accident or if your condition deteriorates, we can make sure you get the care you need without any bureaucratic delays. The condition deteriorates. She was talking about my aging as if it were a disease, a progressive failure that would inevitably rob me of my capacity to make rational decisions. But the woman sitting across from her, nodding meekly and asking carefully neutral questions, was sharper and more capable than Linda had ever bothered to discover. It's really for your own protection, Rick had added from the doorway, where he had been lurking throughout the conversation like a vulture waiting for carrion. If something happened to you and we didn't have the legal authority to help, you could end up in a state facility instead of someplace nice like Sunset Manor. The threat was barely disguised. Sign over control of your life and finances to us, or risk being abandoned to whatever institutional care the government might provide. They were offering me a choice between two forms of imprisonment, never imagining that I might have a third option they knew nothing about. I suppose I should look these over, I had said, gathering the legal documents with hands that trembled just slightly, whether from anger or anticipation, even I wasn't sure. It's a lot to think about. Of course, Linda had agreed, though her smile suggested she considered my review a formality rather than a genuine decision-making process. Take your time, Mom, but don't take too long. We really do need to get these arrangements finalized soon. The urgency in her voice told me everything I needed to know about her true motivations. This wasn't about my welfare or safety. This was about eliminating the inconvenience I represented in their lives while gaining control of whatever assets I might have. She wanted me safely tucked away in an institution where I couldn't embarrass her with dropped bowls or require her attention, with my basic human needs. But Linda had made one crucial miscalculation. She had assumed that I was as helpless and dependent as I appeared, that the woman who had spent 6 months accepting her cruelty and disrespect was incapable of fighting back. She was about to learn that appearances could be deceiving, and that the mother she had underestimated was far more formidable than she had ever imagined. Now, sitting in my basement room with my own manila envelope of revelations, I felt a calm sense of purpose that I hadn't experienced in months. Linda wanted to play games with legal documents and institutional placements, but she was about to discover that she wasn't the only one who could navigate the complexities of elder care and financial planning. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, the familiar sound of her heels clicking against the wooden steps as she made her way down to check on me. She had been doing this more frequently lately, monitoring my activities with the vigilance of someone who suspected their prisoner might be planning an escape. "How are you doing down here, Mom?" she asked as she reached the bottom of the stairs, her eyes automatically scanning my small space for anything out of place or unusual. "Are you feeling all right? You seemed a little quiet at breakfast." "I'm fine, sweetheart," I replied, setting aside the legal documents she had given me and reaching for my own envelope. "Actually, I'm glad you're here. I've been thinking about our conversation this morning, and I have some things I'd like to show you." Linda's expression brightened with satisfaction. She clearly thought I was about to express gratitude for her concern or ask for her guidance in understanding the guardianship papers. She settled into the wobbly folding chair that served as my room's only seating besides the bed, preparing for what she assumed would be a conversation about my grateful acceptance of her plans for my future. "What is it, Mom?" she asked with false warmth. "Did you have questions about the documents? I know legal language can be confusing, but Rick and I can explain anything you don't understand." The condescension in her voice was so thick I could almost taste it. But instead of the usual hurt and anger it provoked, I felt only a cold satisfaction. Linda was about to receive an education that would reshape her understanding of everything. She thought she knew about her mother and her own future. "Actually, I wanted to show you some documents of my own," I said, opening my envelope and extracting the bank statement that summarized my primary investment account. I realized that we've never really talked about my financial situation, and it seems like that conversation is overdue. I handed her the statement with steady hands, watching her face carefully as she looked down at the paper. For a moment, her expression didn't change, as if her brain was struggling to process the numbers she was seeing. Then her eyes widened, and I saw her mouth fall open in genuine shock. "This can't be right," she whispered, staring at the account, balance like it might change if she looked at it long enough. "This says you have over $2 million. That's impossible." "Actually, that's just one account," I said calmly, extracting another statement from my envelope. "This is my money market account, and this one shows my bond portfolio. If you add them all together, along with the value of my real estate holdings, the total is closer to $3.5 million. Linda's hand shook as she took the additional statements, her face cycling through expressions of disbelief, confusion, and something that looked suspiciously like anger. She was realizing that everything she thought she knew about me, everything she had based her treatment of me on, was a lie. "Where did this money come from?" she demanded, her voice rising with emotion. "You worked as a seamstress, Mom. You cleaned offices at night. People like that don't have millions of dollars." "People like that do have millions of dollars if they're careful with their money and lucky with their investments," I corrected gently. "And if they have family members who remember them in their wills." I pulled out the documentation of Uncle Theodore's inheritance, the legal papers that showed how a man I barely knew had transformed my modest savings into genuine wealth. Linda. Read through the documents with growing agitation, her face flushing red as she began to understand the implications of what she was learning. "You've had this money for 15 years?" she asked incredulously. "You've been rich this whole time, and you never told me?" "I was saving it for your future," I said honestly. "I wanted to help you buy a bigger house, or start a family, or pursue dreams you might not be able to afford otherwise. I thought it would be a wonderful surprise when the time was right." But even as I said the words, I could see that Linda wasn't hearing them as an expression of love and generosity. She was hearing them as a betrayal, a secret that I had kept from her when she thought she knew everything about my life. The daughter who had been planning to control my finances was discovering that I had been financially independent all along. "So, when you moved in here," she said slowly, "when you sold your house and gave up your independence, you could have afforded to live anywhere you wanted?" "Yes," I admitted. "I could have bought a house in the most exclusive retirement community in the state. I could have hired private nurses, housekeepers, companions, whatever I needed to maintain my independence. I came here because I thought you wanted me here, because I thought being close to family was more important than comfort or luxury." The truth of that statement hung in the air between us, and I saw Linda process its implications with growing horror. She was realizing that I hadn't been dependent on her charity. I had chosen to live with her out of love, and she had responded to that love with cruelty and disrespect. "But why didn't you tell me?" she asked, though her voice had lost its earlier accusatory edge and taken on a note of something that might have been regret. "Why did you let me think you were struggling financially?" "Because I wanted to be loved for who I am, not for what I have," I said simply. "I wanted to know that my daughter cared about me as a person, not as a source of potential inheritance. And I guess I got my answer." Linda's face went pale as she understood what I was really saying. The mother she had treated like a burden was actually wealthy enough to change all their lives. The woman she had locked in a storage room as punishment was financially independent and had chosen to depend on Linda's love instead of her own resources. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she began, but I held up my hand to stop her. "I'm not finished," I said, pulling out the final set of documents from my envelope. "I want you to see this too." The deed to my house at Golden Acres felt like a weapon in my hands as I passed it to Linda. She read through it with the stunned expression of someone discovering that their understanding of reality had been completely wrong. "You own a house in a retirement community?" she asked weakly. "I bought it 2 years ago," I confirmed. "I've been furnishing it and preparing it as a place I could move to if living here didn't work out. It's quite lovely, actually. 2 bedrooms, a modern kitchen, a small garden, and access to all the community amenities. I think I'm going to be very happy there." "You're leaving?" Linda's voice was barely above a whisper, and for the first time since I'd started my revelations, I heard genuine emotion rather than calculation or anger. "I'm moving out next week," I said matter-of-factly. "I've already arranged for movers to collect my belongings and transport them to my new home. I think it's time I lived somewhere that I'm wanted rather than merely tolerated." Linda stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time, and in many ways she was. The helpless old woman who had been grateful for her charity had been replaced by a self-possessed individual who didn't need her permission or assistance to live independently. "What about the guardianship papers?" she asked desperately. "What? About Sunset Manor?" "We had plans." "You had plans," I corrected. "Plans that involved controlling my life and spending my money while convincing yourself that you were acting in my best interests. But I have plans of my own now, plans that don't require your approval or participation." I stood up from my bed, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was looking down at Linda rather than up at her. The balance of power in our relationship had shifted completely, and we both knew it. "I want you to understand something very clearly," I continued, my voice taking on the authority of someone who had just remembered their own strength. "I didn't reveal my financial situation to hurt you or to prove a point. I revealed it because I wanted you to know that every cruel thing you've done to me, every indignity you've forced me to endure, was done to someone who had other choices. I stayed here and accepted your treatment because I loved you, not because I needed you." Linda's eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were tears of remorse or frustration. Either way, they were too late to change anything that had happened between us. "Can we talk about this?" she pleaded. "Can we work something out? I know I made mistakes, but we're family. We can fix this. We could have fixed it when I dropped that bowl and you decided to lock me in your storage room," I said evenly. We could have fixed it when you started treating me like a servant in your home. We could have fixed it any time you chose to. Treat me with the respect and dignity that every human being deserves, regardless of their age or apparent circumstances. I walked to the window and looked out at the gray October sky, feeling lighter than I had in months. But you didn't choose respect or dignity, Linda. You chose cruelty and control, and now you're going to live with the consequences of those choices. What consequences? She asked, though her voice suggested she was afraid to hear the answer. I turned back to face her, this daughter I had raised with such hopes and dreams, and delivered the final blow that would reshape both our futures forever. I'm changing my will, I said quietly. Everything I've worked for, everything I've saved and invested and built over the course of my lifetime, was going to be yours when I died. But I've decided that inheritance should go to people who value family, who understand the difference between love and obligation. I'm leaving my estate to charity instead. The silence that followed was deafening. Linda stared at me like I had just announced the end of the world, her face cycling through disbelief, horror, and a rage so pure it was almost beautiful in its intensity. You can't do that, she whispered finally. That money should be mine. I'm your daughter. Yes, you are my daughter, I agreed sadly. And if you had acted like it, that money would have been yours. But children who lock their mothers in freezers don't get to inherit their mother's fortunes. Actions have consequences, Linda, and yours just cost you more than you can possibly imagine. The morning sun streaming through the windows of my new kitchen feels like redemption itself, warming the ceramic mug in my hands as I sit at my own breakfast table in my own home for the first time in 8 months. The coffee tastes different here at Golden Acres, richer somehow, though I suspect that has more to do with my newfound freedom than with any change in the beans I'm brewing. Every sip feels like a celebration of independence reclaimed, of dignity restored, of a life finally lived on my own terms. It's been 3 weeks since I walked out of Linda's house with nothing but a single suitcase, and the satisfaction of knowing I would never again have to ask permission to exist in my own space. The movers had come the next day to collect my belongings, efficient professionals who treated my possessions with the care and respect that my own daughter had never shown. Watching them load my few remaining treasures into their truck felt like watching the final act of a play that had gone on far too long. My new home is everything I had hoped it would be when I bought it 2 years ago as insurance against exactly this kind of situation. The rooms are bright and spacious, with windows that actually let in light instead of the dim basement existence I had endured for months. The kitchen is modern and functional, designed for someone who still enjoys cooking for herself rather than someone who needs to be supervised with every meal. The bedroom has a real bed with a firm mattress and soft linens, not the narrow cot with its thin blanket that had served as my sleeping space in Linda's house. But more than the physical comfort, what strikes me most about this place is the silence, not the oppressive silence of isolation, but the peaceful quiet of a space where I don't have to listen for footsteps above me. Don't have to monitor voices for signs of displeasure or criticism. Here, I can move through my day without fear of accidentally triggering someone else's anger, without walking on eggshells around people who should love me unconditionally. The Golden Acres community has welcomed me with the kind of warmth I had forgotten existed in human relationships. My neighbors are people who chose to be here, who see aging as another chapter in their lives, rather than a disease to be managed or a burden to be endured. Yesterday, Mrs. Chen from next door brought me homemade dumplings and stayed for tea, sharing stories about her grandchildren and asking about my garden plans with genuine interest rather than polite obligation. Dr. Martinez, who lives 2 houses down, invited me to join the community book club, and Mrs. Patterson across the street has been teaching me to play bridge with a patience and kindness that reminds me what healthy relationships actually feel like. These people see me as Margaret Thornfield, an interesting woman with her own stories and opinions and contributions to make, not as someone's elderly mother who needs to be tolerated out of duty. The activities here are designed for people who are still living their lives rather than merely existing until they die. There's a fitness center with programs adapted for seniors, art classes, lecture series, group outings to museums and theaters. I've signed up for watercolor painting, something I always wanted to try but never had time for when I was working multiple jobs to support Linda's education and future. This morning, I'm expecting my first visitor since moving here, though not one I particularly want to see. Linda has been calling every day since I left, her messages progressing from angry demands that I come home immediately, to tearful pleas for forgiveness, to barely coherent rants about money and inheritance and family obligations. I've listened to them all without returning her calls, letting her words wash over me like rain on a window. But yesterday, her message was different. Calmer, more thoughtful, with what sounded like genuine remorse rather than manipulation. She asked if she could come see me, not to argue or to try to change my mind, but to apologize properly and to try to understand what had gone wrong between us. Against my better judgment, I agreed to the meeting, though I made it clear that this was a courtesy visit rather than a negotiation. The doorbell rings precisely at 10 o'clock, and I take a deep breath before opening the door to find Linda, standing on my porch looking more subdued than I've seen her in years. She's dressed simply, without the aggressive professionalism she usually armors herself with, and her face is bare of the makeup that normally provides another layer of protection against the world. For a moment, I see echoes of the young woman, raised, vulnerable and uncertain in a way that makes my heart ache despite everything that has happened between us. "Hello, Mom," she says quietly, her voice carrying none of the authority or condescension that has characterized our recent interactions. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." I step aside to let her in, noting how her eyes take in the comfortable furnishings and bright rooms of my new home. She seems surprised by the quality of everything, as if she had expected me to be living in some kind of reduced circumstances despite the financial revelations of our last conversation. "This is beautiful," she says, and for once her compliment sounds genuine rather than calculated. "It's so bright and peaceful. It feels like a real home." "It is a real home," I reply, leading her to the living room where afternoon light filters through sheer curtains onto furniture I chose myself. "My home. Please sit down. Would you like some coffee?" She nods gratefully, and I can see that she's nervous in a way that's completely unfamiliar to me. For months, Linda has approached every interaction with me from a position of assumed authority, secure in her belief that she held all the power in our relationship. Now she's sitting in my space, surrounded by evidence of my independence and capability, and she's finally beginning to understand how completely she misjudged the situation. I return from the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee and settle into my own chair, waiting for her to begin what I suspect will be a difficult conversation for both of us. Linda takes a sip of her coffee and looks around the room again, as if she's still trying to reconcile the reality of my comfortable circumstances with her assumptions about my helplessness and need. "I've been thinking about what you said." She begins slowly, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup like she's seeking warmth from its heat. "About how I treated you, about the choices I made, and I've realized that I need to apologize for things I didn't even know I was doing wrong at the time." This is not what I expected from Linda. This quiet acknowledgement of responsibility without excuses or justifications. I remain silent, waiting to see if this apparent contrition is genuine, or simply another manipulation strategy designed to restore her access to my inheritance. "I think I lost sight of who you are," she continues, her voice growing stronger as she finds her words. "Somewhere along the way, I started seeing you as a problem to be solved rather than as my mother, as a person with your own needs and dignity and rights. I convinced myself that I was taking care of you, but I was really just managing you like you were an inconvenience in my life." The accuracy of her self-assessment surprises me, though I'm not yet ready to accept it as genuine repentance. Linda has always been skilled at telling people what they want to hear, And I need to be careful not to let my desire for reconciliation override my judgment about her true motivations. When did that start? I ask, genuinely curious about her perspective on the deterioration of our relationship. When did I stop being your mother and become a burden to be managed? Linda considers the question seriously, staring out the window, at the small garden where I've been planning to plant flowers in the spring. I think it started when Dad died, she says finally. I was so angry that he left us, that he left me to take care of you when I was just starting my own life. But instead of dealing with that anger, I buried it, and it festered into resentment. This insight into her emotional process gives me hope that we might actually be having a real conversation rather than a performance designed to manipulate me into changing my will. The Linda I raised was capable of this kind of self-reflection, though she had hidden that capacity beneath layers of professional competence and social conditioning for so many years that I had begun to wonder if it still existed. I never asked you to take care of me, I point out gently. I took care of myself for 15 years after your father died, and I could have continued taking care of myself if you hadn't convinced me otherwise. I know that now, she says, and there are tears forming in her eyes that look genuine rather than strategic. But at the time, I think I needed to believe that you needed me. It made me feel important, like I was the responsible adult daughter who was doing the right thing. I didn't realize that I was taking away your autonomy to feed my own ego. This level of psychological insight is encouraging, though I remain cautious about accepting it too readily. Linda has spent her adult life in the insurance industry, where manipulation and persuasion are professional skills, and I know she's capable of crafting whatever narrative serves her purposes in any given moment. Why didn't you tell me about the money? She asks, shifting the conversation to the revelation that has obviously been consuming her thoughts since our confrontation. Why did you let me think you were financially dependent when you could have afforded anything you wanted? This is the question I've been expecting, the one that goes to the heart of what went wrong between us. I take a moment to consider my answer, wanting to be honest without being cruel, wanting to explain my motivations without absolving her of responsibility for her own choices. Because I wanted to know whether you loved me for who I am, or for what I could give you, I say simply. I had watched too many families torn apart by money, too many children who became loving and attentive only when they thought an inheritance was at stake. I wanted our relationship to be based on genuine affection, not financial incentive. Linda absorbs this explanation with visible pain, understanding the test she had failed without ever knowing she was being tested. And I failed that test completely, she says quietly. I treated you terribly, even when I thought you had nothing to offer me except inconvenience and obligation. Yes, you did, I agree, because honesty is the only foundation on which any future relationship between us can be built. You treated me like a servant when you thought I was poor, and now you're apologizing because you've discovered I'm wealthy. That doesn't speak well of your character or your motivations. The bluntness of my assessment makes her flinch, but she doesn't argue or try to defend herself. Instead, she sits quietly for a moment, apparently processing the implications of what I've said and what it means for any possibility of repairing our relationship. What can I do? She asks eventually, her voice small and uncertain in a way that reminds me of the child she used to be when she had done something wrong and wanted to make amends. How can I show you that I'm genuinely sorry? Not just sorry. Because I found out about the money? This is the question I've been dreading, because it forces me to confront my own feelings about forgiveness and reconciliation, about whether the damage that's been done to our relationship can ever truly be repaired. Part of me wants to forgive her immediately, to embrace the daughter I raised and pretend that the months of cruelty and neglect never happened. But another part of me knows that forgiveness without consequences is meaningless, that Linda needs to understand the true cost of her choices before any real healing can begin. I don't know if you can, I tell her honestly. The things you did to me, the way you treated me, aren't the kind of mistakes that can be fixed with apologies and good intentions. You locked me in a freezer, Linda. You treated me like a criminal, being punished for the crime of aging in your house. She covers her face with her hands, and I can see her shoulders shaking with what appears to be genuine grief and regret. I know, she whispers through her fingers. I know how terrible that was, and I know there's no excuse for it. I was angry and frustrated, and I took it out on you instead of dealing with my own issues. Why were you angry? I ask, because I genuinely want to understand what transformed my loving daughter into someone capable of such casual cruelty. What was I doing that made you so furious that you thought locking me in a cold room was an appropriate response? Linda lowers her hands and looks at me with red-rimmed eyes that hold more honesty than I've seen from her in years. You weren't doing anything wrong, she admits. You were just existing, and your existence reminded me of everything I didn't want to think about. My own aging, my own mortality, the fact that someday I might be in your position and at the mercy of someone else's kindness. This explanation resonates with a truth I had suspected, but never fully articulated. Linda's cruelty toward me wasn't really about me at all. It was about her own fears and insecurities, her own inability to face the reality of human frailty and dependence. She had treated me badly because seeing me reminded her of everything she feared about her own future. So, you decided to control me instead of confronting your own fears, I observe. You made me the problem so you wouldn't have to deal with the real issues. Yes, she says simply, and the admission seems to cost her something important. I made you into the enemy instead of recognizing that we were both just trying to navigate a difficult situation. I should have been your ally, your advocate, your loving daughter. Instead, I became your warden. The word warden is particularly apt, and hearing Linda use it shows me that she understands the dynamic that developed between us more clearly than I had given her credit for. This gives me hope that her remorse might be genuine, that she might actually be capable of the kind of self-reflection that could lead to real change. What happens now? She asks, and I can hear the fear in her voice, the uncertainty about whether our relationship can survive the damage that's been done to it. Can you ever forgive me? Can we find a way back to being mother and daughter instead of adversaries? This is the moment I've been dreading and anticipating in equal measure, the point at which I have to decide whether love and forgiveness are stronger than hurt and betrayal. I look at Linda sitting in my living room, this complicated woman, who carries both the child I adored and the adult who caused me such pain, and I feel my own heart breaking with the complexity of what I feel for her. I don't know, I tell her truthfully. I want to forgive you, Linda. I want to find a way back to loving each other without conditions or qualifications. But trust, once broken, is very difficult to repair. And what you broke wasn't just my trust in you as a daughter. You broke my belief that I was safe with the people who claimed to love me. Linda nods, understanding that the damage she caused goes deeper than hurt feelings or wounded pride. She attacked my fundamental sense of security in the world, my belief that family meant safety and protection rather than exploitation and abuse. I understand that I might have lost you forever, she says, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. I understand that the consequences of my actions might be permanent, and that I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. But I want you to know that losing you, really understanding what I've thrown away, has changed. Me? How? I ask, because change is easy to claim, but difficult to demonstrate, and I need to see evidence that Linda's transformation goes deeper than remorse over a lost inheritance. I've been going to therapy, she says, and this surprises me because Linda has always been skeptical of psychological treatment, viewing it as self-indulgent weakness rather than necessary healing. I needed to understand how I became someone capable of treating you the way I did. I needed to figure out what was broken inside me that made cruelty feel justified. This commitment to professional help suggests a level of seriousness about change that I hadn't expected from Linda. Therapy requires vulnerability and honesty, two qualities that my daughter has spent years avoiding in favor of control and competence. "And what have you learned?" I ask, genuinely curious about what insights she might have gained into her own behavior and motivations. "I learned that I never processed Dad's death properly," she says slowly, as if she's still working through these realizations herself. "I was so focused on being strong for you, on proving that I could handle adult responsibilities, that I never dealt with my own grief and anger. I spent 40 years carrying around resentment that I didn't even know I had." This explanation makes sense of so much of Linda's behavior over the years, the way she had seemed to pull away from me emotionally, even as she took on more practical responsibilities. I had interpreted her distance as maturity, as the natural evolution of a parent-child relationship, but now I see it as the beginning of a process that would eventually lead to the complete breakdown of our emotional connection. "I also learned that I have control issues," she continues with a rueful smile that reminds me of the self-deprecating humor she had as a child. "Apparently, when I feel powerless in one area of my life, I compensate by trying to control everything else around me. You became the person I could control when everything else felt chaotic." "And how do you feel about the money now?" I ask, because this is the test that will tell me whether her apology is genuine or strategic, whether she's truly changed or simply learned to be more sophisticated in her manipulation. Linda takes a deep breath before answering, and I can see her wrestling with honesty versus self-interest in real time. "I'm disappointed," she admits finally. "I won't lie and say that money doesn't matter to me, because it does. Rick and I had plans, dreams that we thought your inheritance would help us achieve. Learning that those dreams are gone is painful." The honesty of this admission is more convincing than any protestation of indifference would have been. Linda is acknowledging her financial motivations instead of trying to hide them, which suggests a level of self-awareness that gives me hope for her capacity to change. "But," she continues, and her voice grows stronger as she finds her footing, "in this difficult conversation, I've realized that I'd rather have my mother back than have any amount of money. I'd rather know that you're happy and comfortable and surrounded by people who appreciate you than inherit a fortune from someone who died feeling unloved and abandoned." This statement cuts to the heart of what I've been hoping to hear from Linda, an acknowledgement that our relationship has value beyond its financial implications, that I matter to her as a person, rather than just as a source of potential inheritance. "The money was always meant to be yours," I tell her quietly, and I see surprise and hope flicker across her face. "I saved and invested and planned for decades with the idea that I would leave you financially secure when I died. That inheritance wasn't something you lost through your behavior. It was something you threw away through your choices." Linda absorbs this information with visible pain, understanding that the financial security she had unknowingly sacrificed was far greater than she had ever imagined. But instead of anger or renewed manipulation, I see something that looks like acceptance, as if she's finally grasping the full scope of the consequences her actions have created. "I deserve that," she says simply. "I deserve to lose everything, because of how I treated you. The question is whether there's any way I can earn back even a small part of what I threw away." This humility is so different from the arrogant entitlement that characterized Linda's behavior in recent months that I find myself softening despite my determination to maintain appropriate boundaries. The daughter I'm talking to now sounds more like the child I raised than the stranger who locked me in a freezer for dropping a bowl. "I need time," I tell her honestly. "I need to see whether the changes you're describing are real and lasting, or whether they're just a response to discovering the financial consequences of your behavior. I need to know that you would treat me with respect and kindness, even if there was no money involved at all." "How long?" she asks, and I can hear the desperation in her voice, the fear that time might work against her rather than in her favor. "I don't know," I admit. Maybe months, maybe years, maybe forever. Trust takes time to rebuild, Linda, and you destroyed decades of it in a matter of weeks. You can't just apologize and expect everything to go back to the way it was. Linda nods, accepting this condition with a grace that surprises me. Can I visit you? She asks tentatively. Not to argue or to try to change your mind about anything, but just to spend time with you. I feel like I haven't really known who you are for years, and I'd like the chance to meet my mother as an adult instead of as a child trying to manage her parent. This request touches something deep inside me, a longing for connection that I had buried beneath layers of hurt and anger. Despite everything that has happened between us, Linda is still my daughter, still the child I carried and raised and loved with every fiber of my being. The possibility of rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect, rather than dependence or obligation, is worth exploring, even if it ultimately leads nowhere. Yes, I say finally, you can visit, but on my terms, in my space, when I'm ready for it. No more surprise visits, no more demands or ultimatums. If we're going to try to rebuild our relationship, it has to be as equals, not as parent and dependent child. Thank you, Linda says, and the relief in her voice is so profound that I wonder if she had expected me to refuse all contact permanently. Thank you for giving me a chance to prove that I can be better than I was. She stands to leave, and I walk her to the door, noting how different this departure feels from the last time we said goodbye. Then, I had been angry and hurt and determined never to see her again. Now, I feel cautiously hopeful that we might find a way forward that honors both our need for healing and our desire for connection. Mom? Linda says as she reaches the threshold, turning back to face me with an expression that reminds me of the young woman who used to ask my advice about everything from career decisions to clothing choices. Yes? I'm proud of you, she says quietly, for building the life you wanted, for having the strength to leave when staying became impossible, for refusing to let me treat you like you were less than you are. I should have been proud of you, all along, but I was too wrapped up in my own issues to see how remarkable you really are. This acknowledgement of my strength and independence feels like a gift, a recognition of my worth that I had stopped expecting from Linda years ago. For the first time since our relationship began to deteriorate, I feel seen and valued by my daughter for who I actually am, rather than who she needs me to be. After Linda leaves, I sit in my living room and reflect on the conversation we've just had, trying to sort through my complex feelings about forgiveness and reconciliation. Part of me wants to believe that her apology is genuine, that the therapy and self-reflection she described have genuinely changed her perspective on our relationship. But another part of me remains cautious, aware that people don't transform overnight and that Linda's motivations may be more complicated than simple remorse. The truth is that I may never know for certain whether Linda's change of heart is genuine or strategic, whether she truly understands the harm she caused or simply regrets the financial consequences of her actions. What I do know is that I no longer need her approval or acceptance to live a fulfilling life, that my happiness and security are no longer dependent on her choices or behavior. The months I spent in Linda's basement taught me that dignity cannot be given or taken away by others, that it comes from within and remains intact regardless of how others choose to treat us. The cruelty I endured reminded me of my own strength, my own capacity to survive and thrive despite difficult circumstances. Most importantly, the revelation of my financial independence showed me that dependence is often a choice rather than a necessity, that the power dynamics in relationships can shift when we're willing to use the resources we have to protect ourselves from those who would exploit our vulnerability. As I prepare dinner in my own kitchen, using my own dishes and eating at my own table, I feel a satisfaction that goes beyond material comfort. I have reclaimed not just my physical independence, but my emotional autonomy, my right to exist without apology or justification. Whether Linda and I ultimately rebuild our relationship or remain estranged, I know that I will be fine. I have discovered that happiness doesn't require the approval of others, that family can be found among people who choose to love and support each other, rather than among those who share only biological connections. The friends I've made here at Golden Acres treat me with the respect and kindness that Linda forgot how to show, and their affection is given freely rather than grudgingly. Mrs. Chen brings me soup when I have a cold. Dr. Martinez includes me in his evening walks, and Mrs. Patterson celebrates my small victories as enthusiastically as she would her own grandchildren's achievements. These people prove that aging doesn't have to mean isolation or diminished worth, that older adults can continue to form meaningful relationships and contribute to their communities in valuable ways. They show me daily that dignity and independence are not luxuries to be granted by younger family members, but rights to be claimed and protected, regardless of age or circumstance. Tomorrow, I have a watercolor class where I'm learning to paint the garden scenes I plan to create in my own backyard. Next week, the book club is discussing a novel about women who find strength in unexpected places, and I'm looking forward to sharing my own insights about resilience and transformation with people who will listen with genuine interest rather than patronizing tolerance. These activities give my life meaning and purpose that has nothing to do with being someone's mother or dependent, everything to do with being Margaret Thornfield, a woman with her own interests and capabilities and contributions to make to the world around her. If Linda truly changes, if she learns to see me as a complete person deserving of respect, rather than as a problem to be managed, then perhaps we can build a new relationship based on mutual appreciation, rather than obligation or guilt. But if she doesn't change, if her apology proves to be motivated by financial considerations rather than genuine remorse, then I will continue to live my life surrounded by people who value me for who I am. Either way, I win. Either way, the woman who was once locked in a freezer has emerged stronger and more self-possessed than ever before. The daughter who thought she could control me through cruelty and manipulation has discovered that love cannot be forced and respect cannot be demanded. In the end, Linda's treatment of me taught me the most valuable lesson of my later years, that we teach people how to treat us by what we're willing to accept from them. I had accepted her cruelty because I thought family obligation required me to endure whatever behavior she chose to dish out, but I learned that true love doesn't require submission to abuse. The money that Linda thought she had lost was never really hers to begin with. It was mine to give or withhold, mine to use as I saw fit to create the life I wanted for myself. Her behavior didn't cost her an inheritance she was entitled to. It cost her the love and generosity of a mother who would have given her everything if she had been treated with basic human dignity. Now, as I sit in my comfortable chair in my own living room, surrounded by my own possessions and my own choices, I understand that the greatest gift I can give myself is the refusal to accept less than I deserve from anyone, family included. Love that comes with conditions isn't really love at all, and respect that has to be earned through submission isn't really respect. Linda may learn these lessons eventually, and if she does, we may find our way back to each other as equals rather than as victim and oppressor. But whether she learns them or not, I have learned the most important lesson of all, that my worth is not determined by how others treat me, but by how I choose to treat myself. The woman who raised Linda to be strong and independent has finally remembered how to be strong and independent herself. And that, more than any amount of money or any repair of our damaged relationship, is the victory that matters most. Margaret Thornfield's story stands as a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the profound truth that dignity cannot be stripped away by others, only surrendered by ourselves. Her journey from victim to victor illustrates one of life's most challenging lessons, that sometimes the people we love most are the ones who test our strength in the cruelest ways, and that learning to protect ourselves from their cruelty is not a betrayal of love, but an act of self-preservation that honors the life we've been given. What makes Margaret's story particularly compelling is not just her ultimate triumph, but the complexity of emotions and relationships it reveals. This isn't a simple tale of good versus evil, but rather a nuanced exploration of how family dynamics can become toxic when love becomes conditional, when care transforms into control, and when the natural vulnerabilities of aging are weaponized by those who should be providing protection and comfort. Linda's transformation from loving daughter to cruel caretaker didn't happen overnight. It was the result of years of unprocessed grief, unexamined fears about her own aging, and a gradual shift from seeing her mother as a person deserving of respect to viewing her as a problem requiring management. This evolution reflects a broader, societal issue, the way we often devalue older adults, treating them as burdens rather than treasures, as problems to be solved rather than wisdom to be cherished. The storage room where Linda imprisoned her mother becomes a powerful metaphor for how society often treats its elderly members. We lock them away in institutions, isolate them from meaningful participation in community life, and convince ourselves that we're acting in their best interests while actually serving our own convenience. Margaret's night in that cold, dark space represents the emotional and physical abandonment that too many older adults experience at the hands of those who claim to love them. But Margaret's story is ultimately one of empowerment rather than victimization. Her secret financial independence serves as more than just a plot device. It represents the importance of maintaining autonomy and self-determination throughout our lives. Her careful financial planning and investment strategies demonstrate that preparing for our own future is not just about accumulating wealth, but about preserving choices and maintaining dignity in our later years. The revelation of Margaret's hidden fortune forces us to examine our own assumptions about aging and dependency. How often do we assume that older adults are helpless or impoverished simply because they appear vulnerable? How frequently do we mistake someone's choice to depend on family for love with an inability to care for themselves? Margaret's situation reminds us that appearances can be deceiving, and that the elderly woman living in her daughter's basement might actually be the wealthiest person in the house. Eleanor Richardson, Dr. Henley, and James Morrison represent the professional support network that every older adult should have access to, people who see them as capable individuals deserving of respect rather than as problems requiring management. These relationships highlight the importance of maintaining connections outside the family circle, of building a team of advocates who can provide objective guidance when family relationships become complicated or compromised. The Golden Acres community where Margaret finds her new home represents what aging can look like when it's approached with dignity and purpose, rather than fear and resignation. Her neighbors treat her as an equal, someone with valuable contributions to make and interesting stories to share. The activities and social connections available to her demonstrate that retirement doesn't have to mean retirement from life itself, but can instead represent a new chapter filled with opportunities for growth, learning, and meaningful relationships. Margaret's decision to change her will serves as the story's most powerful lesson about consequences and accountability. Love cannot be bought, and respect cannot be demanded. The inheritance that Linda assumed was her birthright was actually a gift that could be withdrawn when the conditions of love and respect were violated. This twist forces us to examine our own sense of entitlement in family relationships and reminds us that being someone's child doesn't guarantee unconditional access to their resources or unconditional forgiveness for our behavior. The therapy that Linda pursues after losing her inheritance represents hope for genuine change and growth. Her willingness to examine her own behavior and motivations suggests that people can learn from their mistakes and transform themselves, even when the consequences of their actions seem irreversible. However, Margaret's cautious response to Linda's apology reminds us that forgiveness is a process, not an event, and that trust, once broken, requires consistent effort over time to rebuild. The story's exploration of financial elder abuse is particularly relevant in our current society, where adult children sometimes view their aging parents' resources as their own inheritance to be protected and controlled. Margaret's situation illustrates how financial manipulation often begins with small acts of control that gradually escalate into complete domination. Her secret independence serves as a powerful reminder that older adults should maintain control over their own finances whenever possible, and that signing over power of attorney or financial control should be done only with careful consideration and strong legal protections. Perhaps most importantly, Margaret's journey demonstrates that it's never too late to reclaim our power and reshape our circumstances. At 78 years old, she found the strength to leave an abusive situation, establish a new home, and build meaningful relationships with people who appreciate her worth. Her story challenges ageist assumptions about older adults' capacity for change and growth, proving that resilience and determination don't diminish with age, but can actually be strengthened by life experience. The watercolor classes, book clubs, and garden planning that fill Margaret's new life represent more than just activities to pass time. They symbolize continued growth, creativity, and engagement with the world. Her willingness to try new things and form new relationships at her age serves as an inspiration to anyone who has ever felt that their best years were behind them. Margaret's friendship with Mrs. Chen, Dr. Martinez, and Mrs. Patterson illustrates the profound truth that family is often about choice rather than biology. The people who bring her soup when she's sick include her in their daily walks, and celebrate her victories are providing the love and support that her biological daughter failed to offer. These relationships remind us that meaningful connections can be formed at any age and that the love we need might come from unexpected sources. The story also serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of assuming we know everything about the people closest to us. Linda's shock at discovering her mother's wealth reflects how little she had bothered to learn about Margaret's life, experiences, and capabilities. Their relationship had become so focused on Linda's needs and assumptions that Margaret's actual circumstances and feelings had become invisible. For readers facing similar situations, whether as aging adults dealing with controlling family members or as adult children struggling to balance care with respect, Margaret's story offers several crucial lessons. First, that maintaining independence, wherever possible, is not selfish but necessary for preserving dignity and choice. Second, that professional support networks are essential for objective guidance when family dynamics become problematic. Third, that setting boundaries and enforcing consequences is sometimes the most loving thing we can do for relationships that have become toxic. The story's ultimate message is one of hope and empowerment. Margaret's transformation from victim to victor didn't happen because she was rescued by others, but because she found the strength within herself to demand better treatment and create better circumstances. Her journey reminds us that we are never too old to stand up for ourselves, never too dependent to reclaim our independence, and never too damaged by others' cruelty to rebuild our lives on foundations of self-respect and dignity. In the end, Margaret Thornfield's story is not just about one woman's escape from family abuse, but about the universal human right to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of age, circumstance, or apparent vulnerability. Her victory represents a triumph not just of individual strength, but of the fundamental principle that every person, at every stage of life, deserves to be valued for who they are, rather than tolerated as a burden or controlled as a possession. The golden years that Margaret finally claims for herself at Golden Acres represent what aging can look like when it's approached with preparation, dignity, and the support of people who recognize our continued worth and potential. Her story stands as both warning and inspiration, warning us about the dangers of taking family love for granted and inspiring us to believe that it's never too late to demand the respect and care we deserve. Margaret's legacy lies not in the money she accumulated or the comfort she achieved, but in the example she set of refusing to accept less than she deserved from anyone, family included. Her story reminds us that love without respect is not really love at all, and that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is refuse to enable others' cruel behavior by continuing to accept it. In a world that often discards its older members or treats them as afterthoughts, Margaret Thornfield stands as a beacon of possibility, proving that age brings not diminishment, but the accumulated wisdom and strength to know our worth and demand that others recognize it too. Her journey from basement prisoner to independent woman represents the triumph of human dignity over circumstance, of self-respect over others' disrespect, and of the enduring truth that we teach people how to treat us by what we're willing to accept from them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.